There's a vast amount of racism in American film, but this might be one of the most racist films we've done.
No, the religion is actually just manipulating people and leading people into unjust wars for no good reason other than keep the rich rich. Whoa, man, mind blown.
But you're not thinking like a capitalist there.
I'm not. That's always been my problem.
It's a nice liberal nationalist movie where the president can go blow up aliens with a jet fighter, and yet you're still not actually being xenophobic. It's kind of amazing.
The whole QAnon universe, I was like, this seems ripe for them to grab onto one of these two movies and totally miss the point.
Yes.
And they have.
You know, the best they really have is like gentrification and real estate speculation in hospitals.
Yeah, that's Cleveland in a nutshell right there.
Fuck capitalism. Fuck all of this stuff. It is a movie that should be watched by organizers and radicals and leftists and anybody who wants to make a better world. This movie, on the other hand, means none of those things.
It's a Franken blockbuster, like you said, and it's put together in sequences that play out like movie trailers.
Really regressive gender politics, like incredible, but to the point of near parody.
No, Norm, George Wendt in this movie definitely would have been wearing a MAGA hat if this movie was made nowadays.
Oh, God, right? And then convince the workers to break their own picket.
Yeah.
Fuck this movie. It's,
Damn, I wish this movie was better, because that's a kick-ass ending.
This is a paint-by-numbers propaganda movie that completely works because the characters are compelling and real.
Welcome all to the Politics of Cinema. On this show, we believe films are never neutral. There's a political as well as an artistic message captured in every film, in every country, in every time period, and we're on the lookout for all of it. My name is Aaron Spears.
And I'm Isaac Miller. And on this episode, we're looking at Warren Beatty's. And it's Warren Beatty's because basically he was the writer and the producer and the director and the lead actor. We're looking at Warren Beatty's Reds from 1981 because today we are recording on the most auspicious of days, May Day, International Workers' Day, which is a holiday that we celebrate on this podcast.
Indeed. Sometimes for an entire month. See our episodes from last year.
Yep.
When we both had significantly more free time to do more and more episodes.
That is also true. Probably shouldn't have let that cat out of the bag there, but
that's what the archives were, Isaac. People can go back and listen.
I know, right? It never gets old.
The library's just sitting there waiting for your ears to discover it. So why did we pick Reds for our May Day watch this year, Isaac?
Well, I think we picked Reds because neither of us had seen it.
Shamefully.
Yeah. No, I mean, you hear me sort of like cringing just a little bit there.
Yeah.
This is, part of it is I think what we wanted was a movie about communists.
Mm-hmm.
Last year we did labor. This year, something a little bit different. It's also a movie of some personal significance. I mentioned this on the last episode. It is the movie that my parents saw on their first date, which is pretty funny, if you ask me.
And adorable.
Yes, it is. And it's also, it's an interesting American movie. There are American movies about leftists. There's plenty of them. But there really aren't any that are giant Hollywood-style epics, the type of which we don't really make anymore because of the shape of the movie industry. I mean, but it's like these sort of, you could say you're sort of David Lean style, like massive sprawling country to country, romances, except it's about like commies in the Russian Revolution from 1981. Like what? It's just, it felt like it's just something we should do at some point.
Right.
Just sort of talk about what the hell happened in a good way.
Well, right, for sure.
And I should say, like, I like this movie a lot. I think you liked it even more.
I think I did too. Well, I guess this movie, I think we should start off with, we said it's Warren Beatty's Reds. The show is Warren Beatty's, I would say, and also Diane Keaton's in this particular case. The very quick synopsis, in case you are unfamiliar with Reds from 1981, it's an account of the revolutionary years of American journalist John Reed, which is played by Warren Beatty, who shared his adventurous professional life with his radical commitment to the revolution in Russia and his dream of spreading its principles among the members of the American working class, alongside his off and on, we'll say kind of troubled at times not so troubled relationship with writer Louise Bryant, who is played by Diane Keaton.
If you want to have freedom, you got to go where the freedom is, don't you? You're going to go to waste in Portland. Come to New York.
What as?
Huh?
What as?
What do you mean, what as?
What as? Your girlfriend?
What does that mean?
What as? Your girlfriend, your mistress, your paramour, your concubine? Just tell me what as.
Well, it's nearly Thanksgiving. Why don't you come as a turkey?
I don't want to play in your yard. I don't like you anymore.
What would you think if I asked you to do something that might seem a little selfish?
Well, I think you should.
Good, because I'd like you to take a look at my work and tell me what you think.
You'll be sorry when you see me sliding down our cellar door.
That you're going to send American boys across that ocean? I'd say you tell Mr. Morgan and Mr. DuPont and Mr. Rockefeller to get over there and do some of the fighting.
You can holler down our rain barrel. You can climb our apple tree. I can't work around you.
You tell me why you're doing this.
I'm not taken seriously when you're around.
When I'm around, you're not taken seriously.
Oh, God, this is not good. I don't want to play in your yard if you won't be good to me.
I'd like to see you with your pants off, Mr. Reed. Oh, what do you think I should be?
The center of attention.
Jack, you said you'd be back Tuesday.
What difference does it make? What do you think I've been doing? Running around listening to the sound of my own voice?
How do I know whose voice you've been listening to? Obviously, you like it a lot better than mine.
If you were mine, I wouldn't share you with anybody or anything.
There's something I have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me anything.
No?
No.
You want to get married? Does this mean that we have to cheat, or is this a free and independent marriage? You're a lying Irish whore from Portland, and you use me to get Jack Reed to marry you.
Why the hell should I care that you slept with somebody else? Do you think I haven't?
Who?
What do you mean, who?
Who was it?
Who was what?
Jack dreams that he can hustle the American working man, whose one dream is to be rich enough not to have to work, into a revolution led by his party.
Is the Socialist Party prepared to take a position on the draft or not?
And you dream that if you discuss the revolution with a man before you go to bed with him, it'll be missionary work rather than sex.
Where are you going? You're not going any.
Get out of my body!
The officer, these men have the legal right to assemble.
What the hell are you doing?
Me? I write.
You right?
Huh?
You wrong.
I'd rather be with a fighter who wants to change the world than a critic who wants to mourn it.
Well, the place to be now is Russia.
You don't have to tell me what's happening in Russia. I read the papers.
Well, come with me. Support you and we'll join you in revolution.
I would say, though, I feel like their relationship is really the backbone structure to this whole narrative, this whole film.
I mean, I think it's what the movie's about.
Right. Like the politics are very front and center, and we'll get into that. But I think their relationship, like their movie really, it starts off like basically when they meet and fall in love. And this, I'm not worried about spoiling a movie from 1981, also based on a historical figure who died tragically young. It starts with basically when they meet and they fall in love, and it ends when he's dead. Relationship over. So. Yeah,
no, it's about, so I remember I was reading a overview by somebody who was, I think, one of the historical consultants, and he was complaining that it didn't get into the politics in Bohemian Greenwich Village enough, and these people are much more serious politically than it seems, which, like, Emma Goldman's there. Like, it's pretty serious.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, but that's actually not kind of what the movie's about. Like it really is like about their relationship and the way their politics shape their relationship in a sense.
Right.
Certainly during the last act. So, part of it, and it does deal with his political evolution.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he starts as sort of an amorphous, radical, and in the milieu of American radicalism at the time, which I have to admit, I'm not that familiar with. This is not a history that I know as well as I should.
I felt that a lot watching this too, and I took down a bunch of notes of like, oh, I need to look that up. Oh, I need to look that up. Wait, Greenwich Village in the 19-teens? I was like, I don't know anything about this. This is absolutely fascinating.
Well, so part of it is, this is this sort of amorphous era. You've got, sort of the Socialist Party, whose most famous figure is Eugene Victor Debs, but which is sort of, doing sort of electoral work and also labor work. And you have the IWW, the International Workers of the World, which is, I don't want to, is a multi-tendency, but I guess, anarcho-syndicalist or syndicalist union, legendary union. We have a scene with Big Bill Haywood, who's, another famous figure. And, so part of it is he moves from somebody who both would sort of like seem closer to the IWW, also maybe so a little more anarchisty, but like not quite. But also the un-anarchisty part is sort of like, well, maybe, not being for the Democrats in any way, being aware of Wilson, but sort of going like, to, you see the transition in the left to the sort of hardened sort of like Bolshevik model where revolution is in the air, and that means any sacrifice is necessary. And you see the splits, some of the splits in the left in this period, which, is a little bit of historical accuracy. Some of us sometimes wish wasn't so accurate, but is pretty fucking accurate.
Well, it seemed very honest. Like that was kind of the way I was looking at it, where, what's that phrase? My mom would always use a phrase when you're like it's a warts and all kind of depiction here. Like it's not, oh, John Reed is this, journalist who's growing as a radical, like kind of politician and organizer to a certain, but it's not like he's up on a pedestal and did no wrong or like made every move correctly. Like it's like, oh, hey, that was a misfire here. Oh, he's getting a little too into his own ego here. Or as you see, Louise Bryant, the character that Diane Keaton plays, like her evolution is absolutely fascinating as they go through their relationship, but also how she politically grows and how she grows also as an artist and a writer as well. But it's, it's portraits of humans that have flaws.
Right.
And I think also the movements that they're part of, which, reflect the humans that are part of them and the flaws that are there and how the tempers can run pretty hot to the detriment sometimes of a movement or a cause, and sometimes to the benefit of a movement or a cause.
I think it's very interesting, actually, that, it is in some ways very even keeled, right? Like you said, like it really isn't afraid to sort of show their messiness, but I think that's part of the consequence of framing this through their relationship, right? Actually, the gender politics on display in their relationship is really interesting because she wants to be her own figure. He's already well established, and in some ways is sort of, is like oblivious to her needs, and she isn't 100%. How do I put this? So they're sort of negotiating free love, but that doesn't really work, right? Like they never really figure that out clearly. And then they're negotiating her career and the fact that for her to have a career as a woman, and she's, for a lot of these are sort of these radical spaces where like, yes, like there's sexism, but like a woman potentially could do these things. But she, she's in his shadow this entire time. And she does have to do with not being taken seriously. So she, in a lot of ways, the relationship is working through her having to be enough of an independent figure. So their careers, their politics, and their relationship are completely intertwined in this movie, and they sort of interact with each other in interesting ways. So like she basically has to become a journalist in her own right before they can have a functional relationship.
Right. And to do that means that they're not able to be together all the time, which is what you ideally would want in, a committed long-term relationship.
Right.
I think there's this great little thing that they do with the screenplay, which again, Warren Beatty's co-writer, and there's actually, we'll get into some of the production on it eventually here. But I think it's what's kind of brilliant in the screenplay is, as you mentioned, different points in her career, his career, but then also their relationship overall. They go back to this line where anytime they're about to go somewhere new, either one of them, she has the line to him as what? He invites her the very first, not the opening scene, but the opening parts of the movie. He's in, I think it's Portland, Oregon area where she's from. That's where they meet. And then he's like, hey, come with me to New York City. And she's like, well, as what? because she's already married to she's already married to somebody else at that time, and so she's like as a journalist, as a lover, like what are we talking about here? And they they're going to head out on a different adventure at a certain point. And then he's like, oh, come with me here. Oh, as what? Even down to the final scene. Let's get back to New York City. Oh, as what? And they're like, as comrades. So it's this constant like trying to define, like you said, and navigate the sometimes rocky waters of the relationship they're trying to chart here, and determine each step of the way like how that relationship's going to play out. Like in that those as what questions, which I think that comes up like at least 3 or 4 times throughout the movie.
And then, part of it is the final difficulty that they have is that he becomes married to the Russian Revolution.
Right.
Which, fair enough. But like, so part of it is that I wonder if the problem is that he's gone a lot because prior to this point, he's gone a lot because he's going to do journalism and she's stuck at home. This is when she has like her affair with Eugene O'Neill, Jack Nicholson's Eugene O'Neill.
Yep.
And in some ways that gives her a taste of it. She uses Eugene O'Neill, I mean, not intentionally, basically to sort of get a taste of what she actually wants. And then does that with Reed of a more clear cut relationship, I feel like. So that's part of what, God, there's a lot going on in this relationship.
Well, it's even the dialogue, because like as Jack Nicholson, like you said, as Eugene O'Neill, he even says about like, here's what I'm offering you. And it is much more just like it's traditional husband-wife shit kind of thing.
Yeah. Or not even husband-wife shit, but like intense love affair. Not this sort of, bohemian.
Was it almost a monogamy too? That hasn't been the experience with John Reed up to this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's sort of like, I'll worship you. We'll be monogamous, and I'll worship you.
That's a good way to put it. That's like Eugene O'Neill. That's the O'Neill line almost, to her.
Right. So like, it's the intertwining between those factors is really, I think, impressive structurally within the movie.
Yeah.
Like balancing all that. I mean, they're both, part of what's interesting is they're both transformed by the Russian Revolution. I mean, but he gets sort of incorporated into sort of the messianic mission moment, right? So, and this is the thing, right? You have this moment where the revolution, you have, for the first time in nearly 130 years, slightly less, that you have a major, that's not true. There've been lots of European revolutions, but where you've got one in a great power that's really looks like it's going to stick since the French Revolution. There's loads of European revolutions in the 19th century, but it'd been a while. And, and it's by people who are describing themselves as communists, right? Like it's the real deal.
Right.
And, you see that level of excitement, you see how big a deal that is, and he really gets whipped into it. But the thing about part of it is that he's not an organizer. He's been a journalist.
Right.
I mean, when he's talking about the American workers, like he's reported on them, but he hasn't been an organizer up to this point. So seeing him transform into a political apparatchik, and a pretty sectarian one. I mean, so part of it is, one of the things that I like about the movie is, I don't think there's a certain point it's said outright, but they don't have to dwell on it. But his ego's role in how he acts is not a minor one. So the entire division with what becomes the actual Communist Party, right? Basically, the Russian Revolution happens. The radicals who are pro-Bolshevik win in the American Socialist Party. He hadn't even been up for joining the Socialist Party before this, but after the Russian Revolution, it seems like he's willing to join. And the radicals win. They're going to take over the Socialist Party, and the rump leadership basically is able to expel them. So this is a portrayal of the famous split within the Socialist Party, right? Mm-hmm. So he has a division with his comrades over whether they should try to form a new party or whether they should try to take their position within the Socialist Party. And this becomes so bitter that he won't work with them afterwards and he and his rump group which is smaller than the main body of what will become the Communist Party, form their own Communist Workers' Party, and he goes to Russia to try to get recognition from them.
Right.
All of this is totally different, right? All of this is new. To go to get recognition, there was nowhere to get recognition from. I mean, I guess the Second Internationale in Europe, but like, that's not how this would have worked before. But suddenly there is a headquarters of revolution.
Right. And if you can tie your organization directly to them, that makes you official. Yeah.
And, in the long term, there's potentially resources and support. I mean, in the long term, it ends up, disastrous, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the things that Moscow tells communist parties to do that have nothing to do with their local politics, the line changes that have to flow directly from the center are disastrous. But we're years from that. I mean, that's more of the Stalinist party, I guess. I don't know. But I actually really like the portrayal of his turning into that because, if anything, it is it's their sort of critique of the Russian Revolution, right? And we're not talking about 1917 because they're there for 1917, and that's pretty amazing,
right?
And heroic, and that's great. There's some really great imagery, but it is like during the Civil War and post Civil War, which is, if you're going to debate about when the Russian Revolution where things start to get difficult, the debate would be, do they have to do these things during the Civil War as they're fighting for their lives? And then what happens afterwards? This is when party democracy, when both democracy outside of the Bolshevik party and within it starts to wither away. So it's, they're portraying something that's real there. The way that he becomes sort of completely ensconced in this, but also still has his ambiguities and fears and hero syndromes, and also, because it's a romantic movie, love for his wife to such a degree that he would not sacrifice the revolution for her, but like not, basically his problems with Zenonov are that he wants to talk to see his wife. And he's like, we've all given up on everything for this. What are you talking? He comes off as kind of out of his depth. No, he doesn't come off as kind of. He comes off as totally out of his depth.
Yeah.
And I think that's really impressive, right? Like they're not, I guess I'm sort of meandering here, but like they're not, like you said, like they're really not afraid of showing his flaws at every level, including the fact that like, he's really having trouble fitting in here because he was a journalist before. He wasn't a disciplined organizer. And now he's just having to jump right in.
Right. And expected to, because it's almost like, what you're focused on there is the end of the movie when he goes back to get the approval for the American, I guess we'll say, chapter to be officially recognized. He's made the pilgrimage. He's gone all of the way now back to Moscow in the 19-teens. What is that, like 1918 or 19 by that time?
Yeah.
And like, that is no small feat of travel. And he's there just to like, hey, can we get recognized so I can go back and lead this over here? And what they're really saying is, well, we appreciate your commitment to the revolution and to the ideals. So we need you to stay here. Doesn't they want him to stay on as like, as a propagandist, like as a writer?
Yeah. They want him to stay on as a writer
because he's
and
that good at that time. And that's what he's saying. Like it's interesting once he comes head to head with this potential endorsement or not, or what his role would be as an American now in Moscow. That's when the line, like, okay, is it the revolution or is it your personal relationship? And it's funny that it was put in those terms for him, when he's in Moscow. It was put in those terms to him by his wife before he left, by Diane Keaton's role before he left, and he clearly made a choice. Like, it's this. But then once he actually is there and is like, okay, now it's this time, he's like, fuck, did I make the right decision?
His ambiguity is very.
It's really fascinating.
His overall commitment, but ambiguity. Well, part of it is she's watched him. They've both come out of the Russian Revolution changed. She's watched him, like I said, sort of like turn into this figure who believes in the messianic moment of the Russian Revolution, this moment. And it is true. It's like that. It's a hands-on, if you're a revolutionary, if you really believe that capitalism needs to be overthrown. This is the moment. Will there be a European revolution?
Mm-hmm.
We need to be, it has to happen now. And this is the real thing. Everything that, you're supposed to have cared about this whole time, right? And she just, part of it is she sees straight through him. And I think she sees the ego there. Because so like when the split happens, right, where it's the Communist Workers' Party and the Communist Party, she's like, why the hell are you doing this?
Right.
Why are you splitting? And as soon as he goes to Moscow, yes, we want you as a propagandist. Also, we're not going to recognize either of your communist parties. You have to merge.
Right.
Because there's no reason for the two of you to exist. This is not part of the thing is that there isn't a substantive political difference between them in any way. It is pure ego and personality on the leadership's part, which unfortunately is also realistic in the terms of real movements, not just on the left, but everything.
These movements, yeah.
Movements in general, including on the right.
And there's definitely like there's ego also wrapped up in there too, and like there's I don't know, kind of felt like their split ends up having sort of a vibe of like your purity test. Like, oh, we made this decision. Well, that is completely counter to the entire idea. Like, no more. Like,
it's
yeah,
very much about ego.
Very, very unnecessary bickering, but it gets so heated that it's a point where like, well, these two parties are just not going to be able to.
Well, it's not part of it is not even the two parties; it's the two leaders
or two people. Yeah, mainly the two leaders.
And there's Paul Sorvino. I mean, this is the thing about this cast, right? Who's not in this movie? I mean, I love it. I love that I can recognize like nearly everyone in this.
You even get M. Emmett Walsh in those very early scenes out in Portland. He's like the liberal speaker club, the liberal club speaker at the opening where they're introducing Warren Beatty's character, and that's where Diane Keaton's character meets him for the first time.
Yeah. I just, like there's Edward Herman who I know him best from Lost Boys, honestly.
Oh, I've never seen that one. I know him best from Gilmore Girls.
And, there he is, in The Wolf of Wall Street and The Aviator. I mean, he's
oh, yeah.
He's been in a lot of stuff, but it's also just like kind of character actors, but they're all just recognizable. Like,
oh, yeah.
Everybody is.
Yeah, everything, like you said, Jack Nicholson, we got Paul Sorvino, we got Maureen Stapleton, you got Max Wright in there, George Plimpton's around. I don't know, it's like every favor that Warren Beatty, I guess, could call. Oh, Gene Hackman is even in like two scenes.
Yeah, Gene Hackman in a pretty small role is the total favor move there, right?
Oh, for sure, especially in 1981. I mean, Hackman's got clout. Not that he doesn't, but like that was, arguably peak Hackman.
Yeah, he could be doing what he wanted, but he's there for his buddy, I guess.
He's there for his buddy, yeah. Which, of course, I mean, this is 81, but he plays, when Warren Beatty was Clyde Barrow in Bonnie and Clyde, was that 67? Gene Hackman plays his older brother in the movie. He's the main co-star.
Yeah.
I mean, outside of Faye Dunaway, but yeah.
There's a nice arc there.
There is. I assume they're buddies, but yeah, no, it's a who's who, but it's also really fascinating to me because as people were popping up, I wasn't finding it distracting, which I definitely have at other points in time, like in other movies.
No. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I put that in my notes and I was like, figured this out, and I didn't. Like Jack Nicholson pop. I think it's because they're very well directed, and also like when Gene Hackman, like let's use Gene Hackman as an example. It's like 2 scenes, maybe 3, if that, in this whole movie. And when he pops up, there's not like what I would call like an entrance shot. Like it's not like, and now Gene Hackman like enters the scene. He just like pops up, starts talking. They get right into the scene. They get right into the dialogue. And I don't know. It's just they're just all very well integrated into the story, and also just all very well acted. That it's I don't know. I think it's a sign of good direction.
Yeah. No, I think it is. I mean, that's just it. And they're all committed.
Right, for sure.
There isn't anybody doing, there isn't anybody being lazy here.
Mm-mm.
Which, I mean, that's just it. It's like Gene Hackman is a relatively short role, but he goes in for it.
Well, and he and Beatty, because he's interacting with Beatty's character, Jack Reed, in both of his scenes, specifically interacting with him, they have an immediate chemistry, probably because they're both amazing actors. But probably also because they have known each other for a long, long time at this point. The chemistry is obvious and apparent right away within these 2 quick scenes.
Yeah, no, that's well, and the chemistry. I mean, that Beatty does a good job of, and everybody who interacts with him of being this prominent figure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of being this sort of person that everybody knows and likes.
Mm-hmm.
He's very popular, and like I don't know. Well, I mean, obviously, there's just a lot of charisma there, but it's also that you've got actors who can bring it across, right?
Right. You've got a certain caliber within your cast here that you're working with. I wanted to, since you mentioned Beatty's charisma, like this is an era for Beatty. Well, I don't want to. We'll get into the production here in a minute, but just with on screen and the charisma here, I found that really fascinating because you were describing a moment ago, like how his arc goes from journalist to political organizer to trying to lead a kind of communist movement within America after he's been to Russia. They were around for the 1917 revolution. He's written his book 10 Days That Shook the World and is now trying to be an actual organizer within the United States. Convincingly see Warren Beatty not able to be an organizer at the beginning of the movie. There's even a scene where like he goes out and he's trying to organize. I don't even remember what the setting is now, but it's like he and a couple other organizers are out trying to rally the workers, and he's not very good at it.
He's not trying to organize there. He's a reporter.
No, he's out with flyers, and remember the cops come in and they bust him up in the barn and they're trying to get all the workers to get organized.
But he's not. I think he's just there as a reporter.
No, because he's giving speeches. He's giving a speech and he looks over at the at Big Bill Hayward, I think it is, isn't it? And sees like, that guy's actually pulling the people together.
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm not.
He's not there as a reporter. He's handing out flyers. He's talking about getting the workers of the world together and to unite and wield the kind of power. Like he's giving a speech. He is rallying the troops in that scene, and it's not really working.
Right.
From his perspective, the other guys that he's there with, they're the ones like they are commanding the crowd. And you can hear like the way the audio mixes, you can hear the workers like, oh yeah, like they're getting into it in the way they weren't really with that. And which is kind of comical if you think about it, because it's Warren Beatty right there. Like that is a charismatic as fuck guy, both in his personal life and also as an actor. Like he has no shortage of charisma at all. And yet he's able to convincingly, because he's a great actor, kind of come across as a dud. And then contrast that with once he's, towards the end of the movie, once he's there and he's able to like give a speech and he's able to command the room and he's able to, command the attention of the people around him. It's quite an arc you get to see him as a performer go through throughout the course of the movie.
Yeah. No, that's true. Like he grows in multiple ways. I mean, he becomes both. I mean, he sort of says like he can deal with bosses, he can deal with capitalists, he can't deal with bureaucrats, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure.
But to a certain degree, I mean, he becomes one.
Right.
I mean, he's not he becomes somebody who can sort of rally crowds and moments of charisma, and the point for him there to a certain degree is when it's during the revolution itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
During the scenes where they're there in 1917 and the revolution's just about to happen, and he ends up on a stage and is able to rally the crowd, right?
Oh yeah.
If you refuse to support the capitalist war machine, they will follow your example, and if the workers of the world stand together, the war can be stopped.
Он говорит, что если мы все рабочие объединимся, то этой капиталистической войне мы сможем
They support you and will join you in revolution.
Он привез нам привет от американцев.
And I feel like that's a turning point for me.
That is very much a turning point because Diane Keaton, she's there in the crowd, like they've reunited and they're there, like you said, they're in, I think they're in Moscow by that point, right? In 1917, right before the revolution kicks off. And he's saying, hey, the American workers are with you. And he's invited up to give the American worker perspective and saying like, hey, they need your example. Like, hey, you guys kick this off. The American worker is going to be right there too. And you can see in that scene, like he's got a taste of like, oh, hey, I think I glibly want to say like that's where he crosses the line, but I don't know that line necessarily needs to be there. But like he was there as a journalist covering it. She definitely is there as a journalist covering it, but he kind of crosses a line to become like, okay, this is more than just being a journalist here reporting on it. I'm actively now part of this, which I think is why that's kind of a pivotal turning point for him. she's there very obviously sympathetically reporting on it as well. But he's the one who, like, Louise Bryant isn't rallying the troops or giving the big speeches. She's there truly just reporting on it throughout. And that's when he has a turning point and goes more towards, okay, I'm actually now more of a, political activist than reporter at this point.
Right. Which, well, I mean, that's just, people keep sort of trying to get him. I mean, the sort of liberals in his life keep trying to get him to go back into reporting throughout the movie, and he won't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, just to go back to sort of the psychology of both characters, the degree to which they are driven by both legitimate commitment and also ego.
Yeah.
I realized we sort of already talked about that, but just the way that both of them are being portrayed. I mean, her very legitimately as a woman in a situation where she's not taken seriously, but there's also like an element of that there. Yeah, no, it's very, I don't know. It's a really interesting choice.
I would also like to rave a little bit about Diane Keaton in this movie, since we're talking about the choices and the dynamics there, because it was so refreshing to me personally to see such an amazing and dynamic performance from her in this movie. One, because we live in the time period we live in right now, which is 2022. And if you look at more recent Diane Keaton movies, you're like, ugh, I'm not watching Palms. I'm not watching Book Club, or like she hasn't been making movies. I mean, it's her choice to make whatever movie she wants. I have not been interested in any of her movies in quite a long time.
Well, part of it is, what options does she get?
Well, that's what I was wondering too.
She's an older woman.
Right.
Like, she doesn't get to do serious work, even the way older men sometimes get to do.
Oh, 100%. I again, that's what I'm not faulting her for the choices she made in her career. The problem from my perspective is, if I want to go back to great Diane Keaton roles or performances she's given, well, fuck, now we have to talk about Woody goddamn Allen, and I don't want to do that.
Right.
Because he's dead to me. And it was so great to see this performance. I was like, oh my God, okay, this is like my go-to in my mind now, like Diane Keaton role one, because it's unlike anything I've seen her do in her career, but also just all that she gets to do within this movie, and her character arc, going from kind of like a fan of Reed and interested in the politics, and definitely, early suffragist and a journalist, and then also leaving a marriage in 1915 to head to Greenwich Village, and like jumping into the environment that you've got going on in Greenwich Village at the time, and then trying to feel her way through, having this intense relationship with Warren Beatty's character, with Jack Reed, and then on her own heading off to where does she heads off to France as a writer on her own, and gets her career going as a journalist there, because she's fully, what is she? Oh man, I'm really losing the thread here. Where was she at? He goes to find, Jack Reed has to go find her, because when he sees what's really about to kick off in Russia, he's like, we got to be there. This is going to be it. This is it. Like you said earlier, like this is where, if Russia's going to topple and the revolution is going to actually happen, this is huge. We want to be here for this. Then he goes and finds her on the front lines. It's
they're in France,
wasn't it?
They're in France. So, but part of it is the other thing that's happened is that he finds out that she's been fired. So that she's been fired. So it looks like she's failing as a journalist.
Right. And so he goes to help, or to meet up with her and say, hey, it's time to head to Russia.
Yeah. Like, come to Russia, whatever, which is not actually clear that she's been fired, but she's also really busy, and she's getting interviews with generals, and she's writing a book. So like, it's not,
it looks bad, but it's actually not. It ended up being a good thing for her.
It ends up being, it's that she's not necessarily, she's handling herself. She's not, there's situations in this movie where, and throughout this movie, where her insecurities drive her to act like things are good when they're not.
Right.
And this is a situation where actually she really doesn't need him to keep going with what she's doing.
Right.
It seems that way, at least. At least that's the way I'm reading it.
No, I think you're right. She found her footing, and she's doing like the journalistic work she's always wanted to do, now in France, but also like on a battlefield.
Right. And this is why their relationship can work, because they can be more equals, right? This is also, so part of it is the big change once they go to Russia is, I mean, one of the noticeable changes within their relationship is they have an actual functional working relationship because she's become a journalist. And prior to that, whenever he gave suggestions on copy, she was too insecure to take them.
Right,
She would
right.
always,
And in
always
fact,
try to fight.
and
And
in
now
fact-
they're able to go back and forth effectively. It's a really great scene, and it's really great character work.
it's amazing character work because again, like I mentioned earlier when we were talking, when he finds her on the French battlefield, he's like, "Hey, we got to go to Russia. It's about to kick off. This is where we need to be." And she originally is like, no, I'm fine here. I'm doing good work here. I have important work I'm doing here. And then when she does find him on the train and they get to head to they're heading to Moscow together, she does the as what, and she tells him like, I'm heading to you as a colleague, as a journalist, as a partner. We're working together. Never mentions like not as as wife, as lovers, or anything else. So it's another one of those as what conversations they end up having. And you like, I mean, I don't know if you were, but like I was cheering by that point because we're now like an hour and 40 minutes into this movie that I thought based on the tagline was going to be mostly about them in 1917 during the Russian Revolution. We've now had an entire emotional character arc where they're together, they're apart, they're reunited, and now they're reunited both as journalists, both heading to what we know is going to be the October Revolution in Russia as journalists covering this whole massive event. Couldn't be more excited. So like that kicks off that whole center part of the film. And then you still have like the whole finishing arc in like part 3 of the story for them to go through emotionally, but also as characters, and how everything that we're seeing them go through in this whole movie is changing them as it progresses, as it should, with a good narrative. And it's just amazing. It's just amazing acting and character work throughout. But especially, I think, like we've been raving quite a bit about their dynamic in particular as they go through what life's giving them, let alone the politics of it, just the emotional arcs and the emotional balance they're trying to strike with their relationship and trying to make it work. And I would say, mostly successfully. There's clearly bumps in the road that they have to work out together. But it's a really interesting kind of negotiation throughout the whole narrative of how are we going to make this relationship work.
It's a relationship that spirals from one imbalance to another and basically only finds equilibrium during brief moments in the United States and during the Russian Revolution.
Right.
Because, like we said, the underlying dynamic is political and professional and romantic being so intertwined that it's only when they can sync up on all of those.
Yes.
That they have a functional relationship.
Which is what makes that center piece here of the revolution scenes so awesome. Because like it's all clicking for them all at once.
Right. And by the time they come back, they have a period of equilibrium there, and then it spirals off as he becomes different politically and more obsessed and I think allows his ego to a certain degree. I mean,
yeah.
Well, understandable commitment to the absolute revolution and what that takes. At the same time that his ego is sort of driving him and she's sort of rolling her eyes.
Yep.
So that is a hell of a structure.
It is.
And then, in the end, the tension of the separation, are they going to see each other? So, because part of it is he tries to leave, he's in Moscow, tries to leave to get back to her. So I'm jumping around a little bit. He goes back to, like we were talking about, he goes to Moscow. This is after the split within the Socialist Party, after the formation of his party, and when he goes to Moscow, right, to get recognition.
Right, trying to get the approval.
And he tries to get back. He gets captured by the Finns during the Finnish Civil War, whites versus reds. He gets captured by the whites and is held there, and they're basically incommunicado and can't communicate. So they build tension by the fact that she decides when she can't hear from him to go to Finland to try to get him out of jail.
Right.
Which means, basically practically going overland and being smuggled by, communist networks throughout the continent.
Well, and also possibly joining him in a prison if it doesn't go well.
Prison. The Russians are able to get him out through a prisoner exchange. And so he already gets back to Moscow and can't get through to her. He's like sitting there sharing an apartment with Emma Goldman, who's increasingly, and I think fairly understandably, going like, this is kind of going south a little bit. I mean, she's an anarchist. So her instincts are very much like, this is not quite it. Which, once again, it's complicated. But it's
well, hold on. Before you go farther, though, there's also one other added layer of tension, and that's I think about halfway, maybe about a third of the way into the movie, we realize that John Reed, he's with his doctor, and he's got some kidney problems, and so his health is now deteriorating when he's imprisoned in Finland, and we don't know for sure, but it's like, this probably isn't. There's no ticking time bomb yet. There's no like you've only got 2 months to live or something, but we know like, okay, this is not good. His health is deteriorating quite quickly at this point.
Anybody who went into this movie knowing the history, even mildly, sorry, there's a plane going over, history going mildly knows he's just about to die.
Right.
Are they going to see each other?
Yeah.
Will there be a moment? Then he gets sent to Baku for, I think, a fairly awkward scene talking about jihad that maybe historically. So he gets sent as a, basically he's been sort of drafted into being a propagandist for the revolution. He's not really happy about. He has tensions with Zanonov, who's the Russian who actually, or the Soviet official who actually knows English, who he deals with.
Mm-hmm.
Zanonov thinks he's a dilettante who's not really committed to the revolution. He thinks Zanonov wants the human soul to die by getting rid of everything that is worthwhile to have the revolution for a human being. And they go down to Baku, and his speech gets rewritten when he's talking about class struggle. It's turned into jihad, into
like holy war, isn't it?
Right. I mean, jihad actually translates into a number of different things. And direct military conflict is the lesser version of that. There's the inner jihad. It's a root that means struggle in Arabic.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever. Which I feel a little weird about that scene. It may be historically accurate, but it's also, this is 1981, so the Iranian Revolution has just happened.
Oh, when the film is made. Sorry, I was like, this movie does not take place in 81, Isaac. But
yeah,
right,
no,
gotcha,
when the film is made, so you're sort of like, it's the one scene. I could be wrong. I don't know what Baku was right about that point, and I don't know about this rally, but it's a lot of sort of classic Orientalist looking imagery with camels and all sorts of stuff.
But again, I think does it speak to that? Well, this did happen in his life towards the end.
It did. It's just
not
the one
including
moment.
It is sort of
It's not a matter of including it.
Right.
It's the matter of how the imagery is put together. It is part of the epic DNA.
Right.
I mean, this is the epic DNA of the movie, but it feels a little bit more Lawrence of Arabia for a moment there, which is, based off of Orientalist tropes and so forth.
Sure.
But the point is, he gets screwed over, and his speech gets changed, and there's a moment where it also looks like he's committing suicide by white Russian counter-revolutionary, because the train gets attacked and he runs at them, and we don't see whether he lives or dies.
Yeah.
And it's a really, it's a really intense, so he could die there.
Yeah, you're right.
She gets the train, she doesn't see him. We don't see where he disembarks.
Well, I would say the people that survived the train attack, they do arrive back at a railway station in Moscow, and you see some of like the heads that he was speaking with are coming off the train, and there's body bags and caskets being, boxes being brought off too. And so she's like, oh crap. Because like you said, we don't know if he made it. We do not see him survive. He just runs right at it. But then of course it's on the DVD cover. It's on the poster. He does get off the train, and they find each other and embrace.
Right.
And happily ever after. No,
he dies of typhus.
Yeah, he dies of typhus fairly quickly in a hospital there with no real medicine or anything to do. So, but they are reunited briefly, as it were, and then they do have the conversation. Like, he clearly is not going to make it, and he has let's head back to New York City. Oh, as what? And he's like, well, as comrades, which I guess apparently was originally one of the names of the movie at one point.
As comrades?
No, just Comrades was the name.
Oh, wow.
It was an early working title for that one.
That would have been pretty cool.
So all of that conversation, Isaac, all of anything we were just talking about, all the other things we didn't even have time to get into, or, only getting through this movie with one viewing that we were like, just didn't notice this part or that part. Everything we've just talked about led me to one major question as I finished up the movie and I was looking over the notes I took when I was watching it. And that one question was how the fuck did this movie get made?
It's an important.
It's so wild. Like there's no other, I would say, like, American films. We were kind of talking about this before we recorded, but like, yeah, it gets compared to like the epic scale of a Lawrence of Arabia or Dr. Zhivago, or actually, wait, here on the tagline for the movie when it first came out was not since Gone with the Wind has there been a great romantic epic like this.
Whoa. That's a choice.
It's a choice.
Other political direction.
Right.
All right.
Well, yeah, there's that. But like, yeah, we were saying like there's not a comparable American epic like this, at least politically speaking at all. So in looking into the history of how this one got made, being a huge, as I've mentioned, probably almost every episode on this show, I'm a huge fan of like the new Hollywood era, the late 60s, early 70s in American filmmaking. And watching this one, knowing it came out in 1981, I've always kind of in my head been like, okay, 1980, Raging Bull, kind of the end in my head of like the new Hollywood style of filmmaking. I think now I'm going to push that off to 81 and say Reds is kind of that a demarcation line for me, where we're going to go into like more producer driven content in the 80s.
But like via a classic Hollywood form of the historical epic.
Yes. But with like an acting style, and I would even say like kind of the, I don't know, like the rhythms of how it's put together and the content for sure, and the way the dialogue is done, I think is very much, new Hollywood style here. So when I was looking into this, one name that came up is an editor who I'm a huge fan of, Dee Dee Allen. Also, she was born in Cleveland, so, hometown girl. She was the editor on Bonnie and Clyde, which is where she and Warren Beatty first met up. He apparently was talking about having, I don't know if he read 10 Days That Shook the World or read something about John Reed, but he was mentioning like, oh my God, have you ever heard about this guy, this American journalist, John Reed? Have you ever heard about this dude, John Reed? To her, back in the mid 60s then. So this project, this idea for Warren Beatty's perspective was around in the mid 60s, which is interesting. So that's even like predates Bonnie and Clyde for him. So there's absolutely no way, like as an up and coming, hopefully at that point in time in his career, as an up and comer, he hoped, there's no way he's going to get this kind of a project through. Mid 60s, just as a quick reminder, this is when writers like Waldo Salt or Ringlarder Jr. are still officially, unofficially, whatever you want to call it, blacklisted. Like they're not getting work until like Midnight Cowboy and MASH, late 60s, early 70s. So are you going to get a movie about a bunch of dirty commies produced in Hollywood in the mid 60s? Probably not. But at the same time, it allows for some, I don't know, that's the idea kind of sit in Beatty's head. And Beatty slowly accumulates more and more experience as he goes through the 60s and into the 70s. By the time you get up to the early 70s, like 73, he's co-writing with Robert Towne, most famous for Chinatown. He's co-writing with Robert Towne Shampoo, that Hal Ashby would eventually come in and direct. So he's gotten, Warren Beatty's got some producing credibility now. He's got some co-writing credibility now. And he's also got some marquee star power, obviously. Shampoo, budget of like $3 or $4 million, goes on to gross like $50-60 million. And then after that, he follows it up with Heaven Can Wait. So now with Heaven Can Wait, he expands even farther. So now he's producing, yes. He's starring, yes. He's also co-writing with Elaine May, the screenplay for Heaven Can Wait. And he's co-directing now with Buck Henry, of all people. Heaven Can Wait in 1978 makes it for $5-6 million. That one almost cracks like $100 million eventually. So as all stories go in Hollywood, he's now Beatty, kind of peak of his prowess, his career, his power, because he's making money for studios. He can now finally get Reds up and running, because he's not gonna be able to do this on a $4 or $6 million budget for sure. But he's got the clout now, so he's finally able to get this going. He starts working with he brings Dee Dee Allen back in. She's one of the editors on Reds. Actually, her son even gets I'm drawing a blank on his name, but he's a sound designer. He gets an Academy Award nomination for Reds. He would go on to work with Scorsese and other folks too. So for Reds, he pulls together. He's got Dee Allen back editing. He's got a host of friends over the years that he's got that are writers. So he works with Robert Towne a little bit on the screenplay. He goes back and works with Elaine May. Elaine May was doing rewrites on Reds for Beatty, like while filming was going on. So it's a really interesting way that he works with his collaborative folks through the years, but also it just seems like, I think we mentioned earlier, where like Gene Hackman and Jack Nicholson come in on this particular project. Is he just calling in every favor he possibly can to get Reds made?
This is his moment.
This is it. I mean, he's even got Stephen Sondheim is doing music work for this movie. Like, it's wild. It is wild the amount of people that he was able to pull together and get this movie actually made.
It's really cool.
It is.
Well, I mean, it is. This is the thing is like, it's, God, I'm sorry. I'm just saying what we said before, but I think it's a really interesting example of form and production, right?
Yeah.
And politics meeting in a very weird way. Massive Hollywood epic in a period where is the Hollywood epic of this sort already on the way out by 1981?
Yes.
Yeah. So in some ways, it's an anachronistic movie in itself. It's a movie in which sort of, a network through a successful career is being deployed. It's deploying politics, which are totally out of step with what's coming. And it gets awards and is big and is a classic.
Well, I think we should be careful with the epic thing. As I was thinking about saying, yes, it's on the way out too quickly. I was thinking of the 1980, poster child for, oh fuck, this type of movie is done, and that's Heaven's Gate. Big epic Michael Cimino Western that was notorious for killing a studio. Actually, it was so over budget and made so little money. But at the same time, depends on what you mean by epic, because go back, I'm just going to quickly reference, go back and listen to when we covered like the history of the Hollywood blockbuster this past summer 2021. We mentioned how you've got things like Jaws and Superman the movie in the late 70s. I don't know if you count those as epic or not. Those are huge, large-scale productions, but that's the direction mainstream Hollywood's going to be going in the 80s, as I referenced earlier, like the producer culture. Not this type of epic.
That's not what I mean. That's
right,
what I mean.
Okay.
Is this is already in some ways an old Hollywood epic,
yes,
right?
For sure.
The names that come to mind off the top of my head are not even the most classic Hollywood ones, but ones from the 60s or so forth, or 50s.
Right.
Big budget, but it's also an adult drama.
Right.
Which is not on the way out quite yet. When we did the blockbuster episode, there are adult dramas that hold their own with explosion movies in this period.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll get there.
Right.
But
right.
This being your headliner, it's a weird confluence that is in some ways out of time when it's made.
Very much so. And I think also it's one of like the last gasps of the new Hollywood for another reason of this like auteur-driven cinema that I'm a huge fan of. And as you mentioned, Beatty has like every credit you could, think of on this particular movie. He also, again, 1981 was when this movie came out. He started filming, which actually we didn't even mention really format-wise as far as this narrative goes. There's all of these, what they call the witnesses in this film, where it's people that knew...
I haven't talked about this at all. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that knew Reed and Bryant and are talking to the camera in documentary-style interviews about them, very candidly and very hilariously in some cases. And Beatty started filming those in 1971. So 10 years before this movie came out. So at this point, like, it may never actually even be a movie, but he knew there was a limited time period because these are elderly people that he's interviewing in 71, or it started in 71. They weren't all filmed then, but he was filming that early enough. I don't know if it was just to get their stories recorded or if he, planned on using them the whole time. I didn't really find any good answers on that, but he did end up using them. There's all of these little inserts of people talking about, kind of in a spoiler way, actually. Like they talk about and give the audience kind of a heads up on what's coming for Jack and Louise and their whole crew, basically.
Well, except part of it is they don't all know them, right? Some of them know them.
Or know of them,
I think,
right.
Yeah, most of them don't. So it's like people who like are in social circles nearby. And not only that, they're like, I mean, and they're never named. We don't know who they actually are, so we can't really relate them to them. But not only that, they have varying politics. So they're both, you have some of them who are like both skeptical of their sexual politics, right? Of the free love sort of stuff and of the communism. Some of them who are more so. The effect is actually obscuring the historical veracity of the film a little bit.
Yeah.
So like historical memory is sort of in question. So we're showing a version of it.
Right.
And I think that's a really interesting maneuver. And I can't believe we talked about this. I mean, it almost changes everything. Not changes everything, but it's like we've talked about the structure of this movie and we haven't talked about sort of, the core framing device. I was reading a piece from 82 by Robert Rosenstein, and he sort of pointed out that structural element of how they're used. Like they're not even, and he's complaining about it. I think it's kind of great, but it's like they obscure the historical veracity of the story, and it's like, well, yes, to a certain degree they do.
I feel like that's another one of those. We mentioned it when we did an episode on Nomadland, Chloe Zhao's film with Frances McDormand. We were talking about kind of like leftist criticism in Hollywood. And I didn't read that article, so this may be unfair. Let me know if it is. Is that one of those ideas of like, yeah, the movie isn't what you want it to be. It's its own thing. Like, stop saying it's bad or misses the mark because it's not what you want it to be, and let it be what it's being.
I think it's a little bit of that. I mean, I think also there's a little bit of the historian getting annoyed at film, which happens a lot.
Right.
And I think it is. He's also like doing like a criticism of structure that he thinks lands, which I don't totally agree with, but I think is valid.
That's fine.
I mean, part of it is like, what are the political commitments of the movie? The political commitments seem to be the leftism, but at a little bit of arm's length, like with a willingness to be skeptical.
Sure.
But also not saying that they, as comrades is not something that's undermined. This is not like, let's put it this way. I mean, the other example, another recent Hollywood example dealing with sort of communists is Coen Brothers movie
Hail Caesar.
Hail Caesar, yeah, which is really mocking on the whole, right? Like it's sort of, there's a sort of an eye roll throughout toward the politics involved, which is not surprising coming from them. Yeah, it's like, this is not that, right? It takes the politics pretty seriously.
Yeah.
And that means it doesn't give it a free pass.
True.
But also like, is accepting of it too, and on its terms.
Yeah.
So that's a different kind of thing. I don't know.
Well, it's also, as we've been pointing out, nature of this podcast for several years now is kind of a rarity, especially coming out of Hollywood.
Right.
Or
it's
I
a
would say
total
anything even in the indie film market too, actually.
Well, that's just it. So part of it is that it takes politics seriously enough to not give them a free pass, but because it's not just going to be a political vehicle, which I think making a film as political vehicle is valid. And in fact, I wish there was a lot more of those.
Yeah.
But it's not doing that. That's not what he's going to do. And I think that's okay.
Yeah. And also, like you mentioned, it's a movie for like grown-up adults who don't mind wrestling with some lofty ideas and some contradictions and some messiness along the way.
Well, we can't do that, can we?
I know.
Not messy.
I mean, it's not going to fit in the Marvel universe, but it makes for some high quality entertainment.
Do we have to take a shot at All right, it's most comparable in its various ambiguities to Suicide Squad. Not the first one, but the second. No, no.
I didn't see that, but if you were going to go and be serious with that for a minute, I was willing to listen.
It's not. I mean, I will say this: Suicide Squad is an R-rated horror superhero movie in which American imperialism is portrayed as completely ruthless and horrific. and it doesn't really pull its punches. I mean, in the way that you sort of talk about Marvel movies, where like there's some sort of implicit critique, but it's always undermined because you've like collaborated with the military, and it's always by allegory.
Right.
Suicide Squad, it's not. It's just they're just bad.
Gotcha.
In a superhero world. Anyway, side point, not very much like Reds.
Right.
In any way,
Exactly.
I'm not going to go with that.
One of a kind.
It feels that way. I mean, I don't know. The film's is it comparable like maybe John Sayles, except with a budget?
Well, I think we have kind of penciled in, I think, one of his larger, I would say, more epic type of movies coming up here in the next couple months. So that's a good point, though. We'll check in with John Sayles and see shortly here.
So wait, just to say, so my card isn't revoked. When I say that, I don't mean in terms of the production, the style, or anything. Just sort of
the politics. You mean
the taking the politics seriously without being ham-handed.
Right. Gotcha. But also like on a larger canvas too.
Right.
Like epic wise, which I was referring to. City of Hope is one of our like on our to-do list. And I think that's usually referenced as like a very big sprawling canvas that John Sayles is working in that one. So we will see shortly. As we're wrapping up here, I wanted to throw out, usually I try to look up like some criticism, or like, not criticism that it's a bad movie, but like film critics, like what were critics reacting to. And I couldn't wrap up the show without mentioning that I found an article, I think it was actually like Entertainment Weekly. It's an old one or older article, but it was about how Warren Beatty. So we mentioned this movie came out in 1981. In January 1981, an evil man known as Ronald Reagan took his seat at the White House as the newly elected president of the United States. And Reagan and Warren Beatty had a friendship that I was unaware of until doing some research about this particular movie. And very early on in 1981, I don't know if it was the first one screened or not, but Warren Beatty went to the White House with a film print of Reds and screened it in the White House theater for Ronald Reagan.
Oh,
which just adds to me like the what the fuck feeling about this movie. Like, how the fuck did this get made? What?
Truly at the bisection of eras.
What? It's so weird. And in the interview, Warren Beatty mentioned that he did screen it for Ronald Reagan, and they're like, oh, what was his reaction? And Ronald Reagan was like, oh, I wish it had a happy ending. I don't get. Oh, actually, and in the same article, they mentioned that they included an intermission in the screening of it. So my God, to have a recording of what did they talk about during intermission? What did they talk about afterwards? It had to have been more than just it didn't have a happy ending.
I mean, honestly, it could have been completely vapid.
It could have been, but I don't know. I guess I'll let my imagination take over. But
yeah, don't listen to me. Let your imagination run with it.
Oh man,
it's yeah. What a weird moment.
Yeah. Also, what an odd friendship, but okay.
On that note,
that is Reds, Warren Beatty's epic from 1981. I would say obviously we both wholeheartedly recommend it, and I think it has the Politics of Cinema stamp of approval. If you want to use this as a first date movie, go for it.
It seemed to have worked out for my folks.
But on that note, before we sign off, we always like to remind folks to be sure to rate and review the show wherever you are listening to this podcast, whatever app you're using or website. And if you do enjoy the show, tell a friend or two. We're also up and running. You can just check the show notes for social media links and things like that. And until next time, I am Aaron.
I'm Isaac, and, it's May Day. I guess what I'm saying is, you need to stay safe from your boss, who doesn't care if you live or die, as we've seen for both our entire lives, but especially over the last couple of years during a pandemic, and look to the incredible workers. Maybe this May Day will be a happy one. Maybe this May Day we're seeing the beginning with Workers United and the Starbucks campaign, and with the incredible victory at Amazon and the new ALU, a rebirth of a radical labor movement, which this movie that we covered, doesn't really I mean, the IWW is present, right? So maybe maybe a little of that spirit can leak into the world, and maybe maybe that is where we're going. I really hope so. It sort of depends on both on organizing capacity and the sort of the rebirth of a new militant labor movement and sort of where workers are, and then it also to a certain degree depends on economic circumstances. And I mean, one of the real dangers. I mean, part of the opening right now has been this is. For the first time in any of our lives, real economic conditions that gave workers bargaining power. And that seems to be closing off with increasing inflation and also with changing monetary policy from the Fed. They're going to be raising rates. I don't know if they can actually raise rates enough to affect inflation, but it potentially will. I mean, we're already seeing this, right? I mean, GDP went down this last month for the first time since the peak of COVID. So economic conditions may be changing that gave us that moment, but I think we can keep going, and I think this is the moment. There is a world to win, and workers deserve all that they produce.